You're watching this video if you needed help with the quiz today, and this is the video to help you with Quiz A. So the first thing it asks me is to use my double angle formulas to evaluate each problem below. So the double angle formulas I need are the formula for sine 2 theta, and that formula is 2 times sine times cosine. And I'm on number 2, they want me to have the double angle formula for cosine. There are 3 to choose from. I 98% of the time use the one that says cosine squared minus sine squared. So I'm going to practice using these 2 formulas for problems number 1 and 2. On problem number 1, they give me cosine. So they have given me the x and they have given me the r, which means I still need to go find the y. So I'm going to come over here and do x equals, y equals, r equals. So my x in this problem is 3, and my r is 5. I'm about to go find y. Before we find y, we need to pay attention to which quadrant we're in. And they're always going to tell me the quadrant by telling me where my theta is located. And it tells me right here that my theta is on the unit circle between 3 pi over 2 and 2 pi. This puts me in quadrant 4. And in quadrant 4, my y's will be negative. So I already know when I go find y that this is going to be a negative answer. So we're going to go use a formula that we learned a long time ago, x squared plus y squared equals r squared, so that I can find my y value. So x is 3, and 3 squared is 9. We don't know what y is, so I leave it y squared. R is 5, so r squared is 25. Now I'm going to get y squared by itself by subtracting 9. So y squared equals 25 take away 9 is 16. So y is going to equal the square root of 16, which is 4. But I'm going to remember that it's a negative 4 because I'm in quadrant 4. Now I'm going to use my x, my y, and my r to plug into this formula. So I'm going to have 2 times sine. Sine is always the y value over the r. So my y is negative 4 and my r is 5 times my cosine value. Cosine is always x over r, so times 3 over 5. Then I'm going to go multiply my fractions, and I'm going to remember that 2 can also be written as a fraction by writing it over 1. So if I go multiply all the tops together, we're going to have 2 times negative 4 times 3. I'm going to have negative 24 over 1 times 5 times 5, which is 25. So the answer to number 1 is negative 24 over 25. Number 2. On number 2, it's going to be a very similar problem. This time, instead of giving me cosine, they gave me sine. So in this problem, they gave me the y and the r. So again, we're going to have x equals, y equals, r equals. So my y is 12 and my r is 13. Before I go find x, I'm going to pay attention to my quadrant again. So I'm going to draw myself a little circle just like we did last time. And they tell me that my theta is between 0 and pi over 2, which puts me in quadrant 1. In quadrant 1, everything is positive. So whenever I get my x, it's going to be a positive answer. So we're going to use that same formula that we used up here. We're going to have x squared plus y squared equals r squared. I'm going to subtract 144 from 169. And 169 take away 144 is 25. So x equals a positive 5. So I'm going to use my x, my y, and my r to plug into this formula. So it says take cosine and square it. Cosine is the x over the r squared minus sine. Sine is the y over the r squared. So we're going to do a little math. 5 squared is 25. 13 squared is 169. Bring down my minus. 12 squared is 144. 13 squared is 169. I'm going to go subtract the tops. 25 take away 144 is a negative 119. over a positive 169. And it can't be reduced, so the answer to number 2 is negative 119 over 169. So on 1 and 2, again, on your quiz, you have to know these two formulas. Once you write down your formulas, it's an old XYR problem, and then we just plug in. On 3 through 8, we're solving for theta, and they tell me that I want all my thetas to be between 0 and 2 pi, which tells me that I'm going to be doing all these problems in radians. So number 3 says, where does sine theta equal radical 3 over 2? So all you have to do is go to your circle, and remember that sine is equal to y, and they want to know where does y equal root 3 over 2. So here's a picture of my circle. You probably have one like this somewhere in your notebook. And I'm looking for the y to be a positive root 3 over 2. It's positive root 3 over 2 right here at pi over 3. And it's also positive root 3 over 2 at 2 pi over 3. So I have two answers. My answers are pi over 3 and 2 pi over 3. So pi over 3 and 2 pi over 3. And we're done. Number 4 wants to know where cosine is equal to negative root 2 over 2. Well, cosine is x, so I want to know where on my circle does the x value equal a negative root 2 over 2. So I go back to my circle. I know that my x's are negative in quadrants 2 and 3, and it's negative root 2 over 2 at 3 pi over 4 and at 5 pi over 4. So again, my x's are negative root 2 over 2 at 3 pi over 4 and 5 pi over 4. So I have two answers. 3 pi over 4 and 5 pi over 4. On number 5, you have a little bit of work to do, but not a lot. It says tangent theta minus 1 equals 0. So the first thing I have to do is get tangent by itself. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And we get tangent theta equals 1. So now I want to know where on my circle does tangent equal 1. So I go back to my circle, and I know that my tangents are positive in quadrant 1 and in quadrant 3. And I know in quadrant 1, tangent equals 1 at pi over 4. So one of my answers is at pi over 4. The other place that tangent is a positive 1 in quadrant 3 is going to be at 5 pi over 4. So pi over 4 and 5 pi over 4 will give me a tangent of positive 1. So I have two answers, pi over 4 and 5 pi over 4. Number 6, we have 2 sine theta plus 1 equals 0. We're going to start off kind of the same way. I'm going to move this 1 to the other side by subtracting 1 from both sides. I get 2 sine theta equals negative 1. That says 2 times sine, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And we get sine theta equals negative 1 over 2. So where on my circle does sine, which is your y value, equal a negative 1 over 2? So go to my circle. I know that my sine values are negative in quadrant 3 and 4. I know that my sines are negative 1/2 at 7 pi over 6 and at 11 pi over 6. I have a sine value of a negative 1/2 at 7 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. So those are my two answers. 7 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. Okay. Now when we get down to 7 and 8, they're a little bit different because there's this number that's touching the theta. So this says 3 theta, and that means to me that I'm going to go around the circle 3 different times. And every time I go around the circle, an additional time, I have to add 2 pi to my answers. So on number 7, I'm going to sketch a little circle right here. And I want to figure out where on my unit circle does sine, which is y, equal a positive 1/2. Well, sine equals positive 1/2 at pi over 6 and over here at 5 pi over 6. So again, sine equals a positive 1/2 at pi over 6 and at 5 pi over 6. These are the two places. But that's when I go around the circle 1 time. And I said I'm going to go around the circle how many times? 3. So to this answer, to both of these, I have to go add a 2 pi. So I'm going to write 5 pi over 6 plus 2 pi over 1. And then I'm going to have 11 pi, pi over 6, this one right here, plus 2 pi over 1. So I'm adding 2 pi over 1 to both of these answers. I have to get a common denominator. Right now my denominator is 6 and 1. So I'm going to make this denominator right here a 6. In order to do that, I have to multiply top and bottom by 6. So I have 5 pi over 6 plus 12 pi over 6. When I add those two together, I get 17 pi over 6. So far, I've got 3 answers. I've got the original 2, pi over 6, 5 pi over 6. I have 17 pi over 6 because I added 2 pi. Now I have to go add 2 pi right here. So again, I have to get a common denominator and multiply top and bottom by 6. And we have pi over 6 plus 12 pi over 6. And that's going to give me 13 pi over 6. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 answers. The first time around, the second time around. I have to go add 2 pi again to both of these answers because I'm going around 3 whole times. So first time around, second time around. So I'm going to go add 2 pi again. We've got 17 pi over 6 plus 2 pi. And then I'm going to have 13 pi over 6 plus 2 pi. Doing the same thing, taking the previous answer and then adding 2 pi to it. I'm going to get a common denominator again. So 17 pi over 6 plus 12 pi over 6. 17 plus 12 is going to give me 29 pi over 6. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the next one. I'm going to have 13 pi over 6. Remember, this is changing to 12 pi over 6. 13 plus 12 is going to give me 25 pi over 6. Okay, so I have now gone around the circle 3 different times. First time around the circle, I added 2 pi to both of these answers. Second time around the circle, I added 2 pi to both of these answers. Third time around the circle. What I have to do now is take all of these answers and set them equal to 3 theta. So we're going to write down 3 theta equals 5 pi over 6, comma, pi over 6, comma, 17 pi over 6, 13 pi over 6, 29 pi over 6, and 25 pi over 6. Okay, all of these answers, that's what 3 theta equals. And I don't want 3 theta, I want 1 theta. So what we talked about in class is whatever number is right here in front, I'm going to multiply by its reciprocal so that it changes to a 1. So 1/3 times 3 is going to give me theta. I'm going to go multiply all the tops by 1 and all the bottoms by 3. So you get 5 pi over 18, pi over 18, 17 pi over 18, 13 pi over 18, 29 pi over 18, and 25 pi over 18. Okay, those are your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 answers. Those are your 6 answers for number 7. All right, number 8 is similar to what we just did. On number 8, the first thing we have to do is make this just a regular sign. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And we have sine of 2 theta equals negative root 3 over 2. So on this problem, I'm going to go around twice. So I need to find out where on my circle does sine equal negative 3 over root 2. So here's my little circle. I'm just going to draw it over here to the side. So sine equals negative root 3 over 2 down here at 4 pi over 3 and at 5 pi over 3. So these are my first two answers when I go around the first time. Now I'm going to go around 2 times, so I have to go add 2 pi to both of these numbers. So I'm going to come down here and write 4 pi over 3 plus 2 pi. And then I'm also going to have 5 pi over 3 plus 2 pi. Put the 2 pi over 1. We get a common denominator. I need a denominator of 3, so I multiply top and bottoms by 3. So we're going to have 4 pi over 3 plus 6 pi over 3. And then on this side, I'm going to have 5 pi over 3 plus 6 pi over 3. I'm going to add the tops. I'm going to have 10 pi over 3. I'm going to add the tops over here, and I'm going to have 11 pi over 3. So we have 2 answers for going around the circle once and 2 answers for going around the circle twice. But that is what 2 theta equals. So we're going to go write down 2 theta equals. I'm going to write down all 4 answers. 4 pi over 3, 5 pi over 3, 10 pi over 3, and 11 pi over 3. In order to find out what 1 theta equals, I have to multiply everything by the reciprocal of 2. So 1/2 and 2 just gives me theta. I'm going to multiply all the tops by 1 and all the bottoms by 2. So I get 4 pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, 10 pi over 6, and 11 pi over 6. Then I notice that I can reduce a couple of these, so I go reduce. So theta equals 2 pi over 3, 5 pi over 6, 5 pi over 3, and 11 pi over 6. And these are your final 4 answers for number 8. 9 and 10 were a bonus on the quiz. They will not be a bonus on the test. You will have to know how to do problems just like these. The first one says sine squared theta plus 2 sine theta plus 1 equals 0. On a problem like this, we're going to factor. And I know to get a sine squared, I have to have a sine theta times a sine theta. And I know right here to get a plus 1, I'm going to have a 1 times a 1. So sine theta plus 1 times sine theta plus 1 equals 0. This is called factored form. To solve this equation, I set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So the first equation, I'm going to minus 1 from both sides and get sine theta equals negative 1. On the second equation, I'm going to do the exact same thing, and I'm going to get the exact same answer. So I'm looking for where on the circle does sine theta equal negative 1. Sine theta equals negative 1 at 3 pi over 2. So there's only one answer here. It's 3 pi over 2. Number 2, I have to make the right side equal 0 first. So I have 2 cosine squared theta minus cosine theta equals 0. I notice that they both have a cosine, so I'm going to factor out a cosine theta. And we get cosine theta minus 1 when I factor out. I'm now in factored form, so I can say cosine theta equals 0 and 2 cosine theta minus 1 equals 0. The first equation is solved for. Cosine theta equals 0. The second equation, I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and then I'm going to divide by 2. So cosine theta equals 1 over 2. So I want to know where on my circle does cosine equal 0, and where on my circle does cosine equal 1/2. Cosine equals 0 at 0 radians, at pi over 2 radians, and 3 pi over 2 radians. Cosine equals 1/2 at pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. So we have 4 different answers: pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, pi over 4, and 5 pi over 3. And that video will take you through quiz A. If you want to watch the other video for quiz B, open that one up and watch that for further examples. I hope this helps.